Okay.
Yeah, good Easter morning, David.
Yeah. Good Easter morning. Happy Resurrection Day. Good to good good to see you guys join this live stream. And I have a message for you titled "The Trials and Resurrection of Jesus Christ." And we'll get started here. And scene slide number 2. Hey, I had an interesting experience at Costco the other day. I went at 5:30. Costco these days is closed at 6. So there were very few people, and it felt strange to see very few people. But what was even stranger was I found a stack of Easter egg candies, Easter candy, Easter goodies, and there it was. And so I couldn't resist. So I bought uh, a set of Easter egg candy for the kids. And so when we finally get together, we're going to have a delayed Easter egg hunt. And not to leave the adults out, I'm going to pass out Moonstruck chocolate to the adults. So I miss you guys, and I'm really looking forward to getting back together. But let's today focus on the resurrection. Okay, so I want you to hear this song by Phil Spector and a group called the Teddy Bears. This was published in 1958 and is a wonderful little song. To know him is to love him. Here we go. See him smile, makes my love with wine. To know him is to love him. And I do, and I do. Okay, so I wanted to share that song to you because that's kind of captures what I'm trying to do for our Easter message today, which is, yeah, resurrection, phenomenal thing. It's a slam dunk. Everything's different because of the crucifixion resurrection. Uh, and I'm staggered by it. But what I really want for each one of us is for us to really, really know Him who is resurrected and get to know Him. A resurrection message. I'm going to do it in two parts today, part one, and next time, part two. And I'm going to focus on what preceded the cross, meaning I want to slowly work towards the cross to really get the sense of the cross and the resurrection. And next Sunday, part two, I will focus on the 40 days in which post-resurrection Jesus appeared to almost 1,000 people. We have real historical warrant. In all this, my hope for each one of you is, would you walk with Jesus in a very special way and get to know him? Because to know him is to love him. Slide number 5. Talk about knowing. Old Testament, Isaiah 53, who prophetically saw the life of Jesus and the movement towards the cross. Isaiah 53, the suffering son chapter, where Jesus is prophetically portrayed as the perfect servant of Yahweh who suffers. And there are 25 plus different descriptions of his suffering, despised, rejected, grieved, and so forth. And we're going to see that very clearly as he marches towards the cross. The pain and suffering didn't just begin at the cross. He was moving through pain and suffering because God, who loves us, he comes to us. He pain and suffering to embrace us and to break the power of sin and death. And the resurrection will confirm that. So, slide number 6. What preceded in what we call the Holy Week is the greatest trial in human history. Uh, it's around April 6, 1932. That's a good scholarship guess about the time of the crucifixion resurrection. And the defendant is Jesus of Nazareth. There are actually 5 separate trials, and by implication, one public opinion trial. There's actually six, one being implied. And the five trials are under two different legal systems. And there are three different crimes that Jesus is charged with, and there are actually 12 illegal violations against Jesus. Jesus should have been set free because of the illegal violations. Uh, but he is found guilty 4 out of 5 trials. Slide number 7. But first, let's pull back and get the ancient context of the ancient world. 100 years before 32 AD, Romans swept through the Mediterranean Sea and conquered all the known world. Judea, a small little eastern province called Palestine, was also conquered by the Romans. And the Romans imposed military dictatorship, which means they removed all civil, religious powers and privileges and slowly restored them if the various conquered regions complied with Rome's dictatorship. Okay, slide number 8. Legal background. Two sources of legal background that we're going to see in the 5 trials that Jesus underwent on his march movement towards the cross, and the resurrection that confirms what he did and vindicated him. The laws of Moses, Mosaic code, and you can see that even reported today in the Talmud, in the ancient Jewish text. And the ruling was the Mosaic Code was the ruling religious law in Judea at 32 AD. Then the secular Roman law, based on Roman Code of Criminal Procedure. So you had the Mosaic laws, in which Jesus goes through a religious trial, 3 of them, and the Roman law, which he goes through 2 secular trials. Around 1 AD, Rome restored Judean religious privileges and courts, but not civil powers. So, Palestine was conquered by the Romans, military dictatorship was established, but slowly around 1 AD, they started to gain some rights, and one of them was to have religious court. 32 AD, it was possible to try a Jewish person for a religious crime in a religious court only. Okay, so slide number 9. Who are the responsible parties involved in the 5 trials of Jesus Christ? Mere handful of men, the ruling class in Judea on the Jewish side. They saw in Jesus a Galilean a threat to their power and way of life. And they believed that his death was necessary to restore order and peace, because if they didn't, the Romans would come and take away all their rights, religious rights in courts and so forth, and reestablish the dictatorship. Uh, uh, and so they were very much concerned that Jesus was stirring up a popular revolution against Rome, and they would end up losing their position and power, and they would lose their religious authority under Rome. Slide number 10. The religious leaders' primary charges, they're going to level 2 charges against Jesus. One is 2 charges against Jesus as a religious legal basis to try to destroy Jesus. First, they're going to accuse him of being a heretic of the Torah, practicing heresy. Second, they're going to accuse him of witchcraft. They know that they're reported and eyewitnesses regarding the miracles that Jesus is doing, so they can't deny that miracles are happening, but they're going to attribute the miracles to the fact that Jesus performed these miracles in the power of the devil, witchcraft. by the way, from a historical uh, perspective, interestingly, that's a negative uh, implication or confirmation that miracles did actually confirm. When your enemies confirm that you did something, that's a nice historical confirmation. Slide number 11. Who are the key players in the five trials? Annas, Caiaphas, Herod the son, and Pilate, Pontius Pilate, and Barabbas. So Annas was the uncrowned king, high priest of Judea. He was very wealthy and had tremendous influence, and he was behind the scene directing 73 elders, the Sanhedrin, and he got his wealth from the temple consensus of sacrifice because people were required religiously to come and offer annual offerings and sacrifices at the temple, and there would be a temple exchange. Remember, Jesus made a whip out of cords and went in and cleansed the temple, overturning money changers' table, where people would have to take their currency in exchange for temple currency to make a temple sacrifice. Is going to inflate the interest rate and become very wealthy. He controlled the temple money changers. All right, next slide. Slide number 12. Caiaphas was his son-in-law, who was dominated by Annas, and Caiaphas will serve as the chief prosecutor of Jesus in the religious trial. He's given direct responsibility by Annas, the father-in-law, to get rid of Jesus before daybreak, because when the trial happened, it was the night before the Passover, and Jerusalem is flooded with all kinds of religious pilgrims. And they wanted the trial over before the feast of the Passover began the next day, so they would not be unclean. They would be clean to participate in the feast of the Passover. Pontius Pilate was a provincial governor, slide 13, of Judea. He was born in Spain, and he was considered a second-rate centurion or captain in the Roman legions. He married Claudia, granddaughter of Tiberius Caesar, so he married really well, had connection through marriage to the emperor, and he was elevated to a rank of general and sent to Judea as a governor. But the fact that he was sent to Judea, which was considered the armpits of the Roman Empire, if you were in the military, you did not want to be stationed in Palestine. And that probably implies some kind of military career demotion that Pilate had experienced. Pilate, slide 14, arrives in Jerusalem, and he makes a classic, serious initial mistake. He marches in soldiers in full military dress, bearing the standards of battle, and enters into the temple court, which to the Jews is a religious violation, and the Jewish people almost riot. There's a near riot. Now, in Pilate's dominion, jurisdiction over Palestine, he is facing all kinds of insurrections, revolutionaries are rising, trying to pull him down, to pull down the Roman Empire, and twice he has to ask for assistance from Rome. Remember, Palestine is not considered a sign of you having a high trajectory military career. It's a sign of someone doesn't think very well of you, as evidenced by, it's like if you're in the military and you got assigned to Midway Island. Well, gosh, what does assignment mean? And now, so he had to appeal to Rome to help put down the two riots, which means that he is indicating to Rome he's failing. So Pilate is deeply concerned about the crowds, possibly a riot, and that helps us understand some of the motivation uh, that we see in when he oversees the trial of Jesus. Herod the son, uh, who is a son of Herod the Great, the father who is not a Judean nor a Roman. But remember, Herod the Great is the one who murdered the babies in Bethlehem. Now his son, Herod the son, a vice tetrarch of Galilee, he's the one who beheaded John the Baptist, and his court uh, consisted of 24/7 entertainment. I heard the son was a bit of a jaded person, and he consumed a lot of his time in entertainment. So he invited magicians, musical people, performers, and so forth. It was like 24/7 Las Vegas. And he heard about the miracles Jesus was performing, so he wanted to see Jesus perform a miracle. He wanted to see firsthand. So he gets excited when Pilate hands Jesus over for examination. Uh, and he wants to see if Jesus is going will perform a miracle, and he presides over one of the five trials. Okay, player in the trial, Barabbas. Jo- Josephus, a historian theologian, claims Barabbas was a black sheep son of a wealthy uh, Jerusalem family. Other historians claim he was from a low caste and a criminal. So there's some differences about the background. He was a popular revolutionary, and he was arrested 3 or 4 nights before Jesus' trial. So Barabbas's life is going to intersect with Jesus' life. By the way, there's a profound truth in that. Uh, God is forever intersecting your life uh, pattern, your life destination, your life trajectory. God often cuts across that, and it becomes a crisis defining moment. Barabbas, arrested 3 or 4 nights before Jesus' trial, arrested for a plot to rob, murder, and plunder the Romans, to raise funds to drive out the Romans. Okay, slide 17. Biblical antecedents. What is proceeding up to the crucifixion and then the resurrection 3 days later? If you read your Gospels carefully, you find out in the latter days and in the Passion Week, the Holy Week, right before crucifixion, you have the raising of Lazarus, which stirs the popular hearts, and the leaders are very concerned about the popularity of Jesus, so they consolidate a conspiracy. He must go. And on Palm Sunday, Jesus enters and cleanses the temple. Interestingly, on Palm Sunday, there were two parades. Jesus comes into Jerusalem hailed as the Messiah and the King, and then at an adjacent gate nearby, the Passover lambs, which were held in the Jerusalem fields and will come in on the same day. So Jesus, the Lamb of God, comes in, and the Passover lambs are brought in on the same day to be inspected, to be slaughtered for the feast of the Passover. So you have rising of Lazarus, conspiracy, Palm Sunday. Then you have the cleansing of the temple. Jesus cleanses the temple. Then you have the Last Supper, and Jesus washes the feet of the disciples. And then Jesus goes into the garden, faces the hour, faces the cross, faces the cup, and fully submits to his Father. And then you have the rest. All painful suffering, slow, methodical march towards the crucifixion and the resurrection. Wow! To know him is to love him. You can't love someone you don't know, that you're not getting to know. And you get to know that person by hearing their stories about them and walking in their footsteps. Mosaic law. The laws of Moses were very concerned about the protection of individual rights. And modern people go, wow, I thought individual rights was a modern notion. Don't we, as modern and postmodern people, we really understand individual rights? No. The ancients understood about individual rights, especially the Jewish people, because they believed that people created an image of God. That's the defining definition of humanness, which then translates into the Mosaic Law had a deep concern that a son of Abraham, son of the covenant, was not unjustly put to death. So they made sure there were individual rights. Slide 19, Jesus' trial. Religious is both a religious and legal. There were both religious and legal violations. There's some 12 violations, which meant Jesus should have been set free. There were 12 illegal moves or verdicts against Jesus Christ. He truly was innocent. 5 trials, slide 20. Here's a summary. First trial, religious trial before high priest Annas, before the feast of the Passover begins. Before Passover begins. Second trial, religious trial before the Sanhedrin. Third trial, secular trial before Pilate. Fourth trial, secular trial before Herod, because Pilate sends Jesus to Herod for examination and advice. Fifth trial, Jesus is brought back before Pilate. 5 trials. Okay, slide 21. Violation number 1, Mosaic Law. You cannot arrest a person for capital crime based upon information furnished by a fellow of the accused. Interesting way of ensuring individual rights. It goes like this. The Mosaic Law rationale is, if the accused is a criminal, so would be his followers be. So word of a criminal is legally insufficient grounds to justify an arrest. The idea is you can't trust a criminal, so why would you trust a follower of the criminal? And so and that was a violation of Jesus' rights. Slide 22, the arrest. Jesus was arrested for a capital crime based upon a betrayal of one of his disciples for 30 pieces of silver. If the Sanhedrin were doing their job, they would say, we can't accept the testimony of Judas. Jesus was arrested. Judas, the informer, identifies Jesus with a kiss. Jesus is bound and taken to Annas, the arrest. Violation 2, Mosaic Law. You cannot arrest one for a capital crime during the hours of darkness. Mosaic law rationale to protect individual rights. To take away the arrested from his or her family and friends during the hours of darkness may somehow impair or destroy his legal rights. If the accusation of crime is valid, then it should be done and processed in daylight, out in the open, not in secrecy in the dark. Slide number 24. The first religious trial Jesus underwent before Annas. And there's violation 3. Jesus is bound, is taken to the high priest Annas. Annas, the high priest, has no legal right to individually try Jesus. It's a violation. Rationale: illegal to have a one-judge court. In order to protect individual rights, the Jewish people understood a one-judge court would not ensure the individual's rights. The court has to be the smallest, at least 3 judges, and the lesser Sanhedrin, 23, or the greater Sanhedrin, 73. So he should never have been brought to Annas as a one-judge court process. He should have been brought to at least 3 members of Sanhedrin, and ideally a smaller Sanhedrin, 23, which would be a lesser Sanhedrin court. Sanhedrin is a religious elders who ruled over the Jews. And the greater Sanhedrin comprised of all 73 elders. Slide number 25. Second trial. Religious violation 4. Crime can only be established according to the witness of 2 or more witnesses. Jesus knew his legal rights and kept asking for collaborative testimony. He understood his rights, but his rights were denied in the trial. The Mosaic rationale regarding something has to be established or more witnesses. A crime must be established through collaborative witnesses and evidences. You can't just have one person, he said, she said, dynamic doesn't establish the validity of the charge or the process of accusation with its confirmation. Violation 5, slide 26. Caiaphas convened the greater court after midnight for the purpose of hearing testimony against Jesus for capital crime. Remember, he's already gone through one religious trial under Annas, one court process, which was illegal. Now he's handed over to Caiaphas, who convenes the greater court to try Jesus for capital crime. Mosaic law prohibits a court to sit to hear testimony in a capital crime after darkness. Mosaic law rationale: a serious crime, people must be alert and attentive, must meet during the day. So Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin violated their own Mosaic law. Participates in the court's proceedings before the greater Sanhedrin, all 73 elders sitting together like a Supreme Court to judge a case, and there's no district attorney, and no Sanhedrin member was permitted to personally to interrogate the accused. They sat and listened to the witnesses and testimonies, but they could not prosecute the case. Rationale: only testimony against the accused was that produced by the complaining witnesses themselves. In the greater Sanhedrin court, there wasn't a prosecution team bringing charges. There were just simply eyewitnesses giving their testimony, which the 73 would judge as to its veracity. Slide 28, the accusation. Jesus is charged with sedation, which is a capital crime. Sedation is a crime of tearing down or destroying one's society or religion. False witnesses claim that Jesus threatened to destroy the temple, and destruction of the temple is paramount to, to the destruction of the nation of Israel. Sedation. Slide 29, the accusation. He's accused of exciting the people to disobedience. He's accused of mocking their ancient traditions. He's accused of violating divine commands about the Sabbath. He's accused of inciting others to break the Sabbath laws. And he's accused of sitting down to eat with unwashed hands. And he's accused of being friendly with sinners, visiting and eating with them. Accusations. Violation number 7, slide 30. When the trumped up witnesses were insufficient to prove his guilt, Caiaphas actively took up the prosecution, interrogated and accused Jesus himself. Mosaic law. It is illegal for the high priest who presides over the court to participate in the prosecution. Caiaphas did not hold his position as the president of the greater Sanhedrin, overseeing and monitoring the 73 sitting elders, the Sanhedrin. He jumps in and participates and becomes a prosecutor. Violation number 8. Caiaphas changed the crime from sedition to blasphemy, which was a more serious Judean crime. He charges that Jesus claimed to be the Son of God and to forgive sins. Rationale. It's illegal to change a trial by changing the crime that one is charged with. You can't bring someone into trial and then keep changing the charges to nail that person. It's a violation of individual rights. Slide 32, silence and oath. Notice Jesus remained silent when the charges were changed. Caiaphas used a Mosaic oath, like us, tell the truth, the whole truth. We say, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth? Caiaphas himself is using Mosaic law to compel Jesus to speak, but Jesus remains silent. Jesus then finally responds, and he affirms his divinity. Violation 9. Caiaphas stopped the trial, tore his robe, which is required by all good Judeans when blasphemy is spoken in their presence, and demanded an immediate verdict from the court. Mosaic law rationale says it's illegal to render in a capital crime a verdict on the same day. You must retire home for 2 days, eat light food, drink light wines, sleep well, then return to give the verdict. Well, Caiaphas violates that Mosaic law rationale and renders a verdict right on the spot by tearing his clothes and charging Jesus with blasphemy. Violation 10. The court simultaneously voted to condemn Jesus. That's illegal. They're required by Mosaic law to vote one at a time, beginning with the youngest member, concluding with the senior member. The Mosaic rationale is in this way the vote of a younger cannot be influenced by the vote of the older or the wise. So they voted simultaneous together in unison. That's a violation. Violation 11. The court was unanimous in the guilty verdict. This one's really interesting. It is illegal to render a unanimous verdict of guilt in which is tantamount to a verdict of acquittal. A guilty verdict required that the vote must be one less than all and one more than half. The idea and the rationale is that unless there is at least one member who votes in favor of the innocent, the defendant is denied a fair trial. If everybody votes guilty, the Mosaic law, with its understanding individual rights, is that accused is denied their rights. There must be at least one who votes in favor, votes innocent regarding the accused. Otherwise, it's a conspiracy of the whole group against the individual. Pilate's legal actions. He's from Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin sent to Pilate. Pilate comes out to meet them. Notice he comes out to meet them. They don't go fully inside to where Pilate is residing, because to enter a Gentile house would be defilement, and which means if you defiled unclean, you couldn't participate in the Passover, the next, which will begin in a few hours. Pilate knew the 4 steps of the Roman code of criminal procedure. The Sanhedrin, Annas and Caiaphas, understood the Mosaic laws and their rationale. Pilate understood, trained as a Roman, he understood the 4 steps of the Roman code of criminal justice. Pilate will act consistent with the code, and unlike his Jewish counterparts, he is consistent, remains true to the Roman system of law, where the Jewish leaders are violating their own ethics. Okay, Roman codes, there are 4 steps. Step 1, the charge. According to the code, Pilate first determines the charge, determines that there is basis for the charge, or there is a basis for the charge. Pilate's response tells them to take Jesus and judge himself, because he says there's no basis for the charge. Roman Code, step 2 and 3, slide 38. Step 2, after determining the charge, and Pilate saying there is no basis for the charge, but they keep insisting, so he goes to step 2, interrogation. Pilate takes Jesus into the chambers to conduct the 2nd step of the code of interrogation. And then he does step number 3. He hears a defense to the charges, and he engages with conversation. And interestingly, Jesus, a defense of justification in a very interesting way, primarily being silent and speaking up in few places. Roman Code, step 4, the verdict. So you have determined the charge, you have an investigation, and then you hear the defense of the accused. Now you render the verdict. Pilate hears Jesus' defense, announces that Jesus is innocent of charges. Luke 23:14, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him." So he renders a verdict of not guilty. 4th trial. Herod the son happens to be in Jerusalem at this time, so Pilate sends Jesus to Herod the son. Herod was pleased to see Jesus because he wanted some entertainment for his court, and he hoped that Jesus would perform a miracle which would fascinate him, excite him. Herod the son, I think, is jaded and is using excitement to counter that jadedness. That's at least a psychological opinion on my part. Jesus refuses to perform any miracles for Herod. And so Herod and his court mock Jesus, and Jesus is sent back to Pilate. Slide 41, 5th trial, secular. Jesus before Pilate again. Received Jesus from Herod. Pilate again sent Jesus to Herod. Herod gets nowhere with Jesus and is sent back to Pilate. And Pilate receives Jesus from Herod and takes him into his palace again, second time, and inquires of Jesus, has conversation with him, finds no cause leaders, and he says he finds no crime. Okay, the crowds, and here is an implied sixth trial, five legal trials under Mosaic law and Roman law, but one popular trial. Uh, he presents Jesus to the people and they demand Jesus' death. And they're willing to accept Barabbas instead of Jesus. A man acquainted with sorrow, experiencing rejection, betrayal, abandonment, not just once. He wasn't just betrayed by Judas with the 30 pieces of silver, but over and over and over. His heart is breaking inside of him. To know him is to love him. There's an implied sixth trial, tried in a public opinion court. He's rejected by his own people, and John picks this up in John 1, verse 11, where he says, he came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Betrayal, abandonment, rejection, disqualification, not just once, but his whole life. Isaiah 53. This is all proceeding up to the crucifixion. Jesus' heart is being cut at every point. And the final pain and suffering, crucifixion, but then the incredible resurrection. Violation 12. Caiaphas in the court again changed the charge from sedition to blasphemy. So when Pilate says, here's, behold the man, I find no charges against him, they change the charge from sedition to blasphemy to force Pilate to crucify Jesus. Blasphemy to Jesus because they say Jesus treasonous against Caesar. Rationale is illegal to continually change a crime to suit one's legal agenda. It's like today, if you went to court under some criminal trial and the prosecution just kept, during the course of the trial, kept changing the crime just to nail you. That's what they did. Pilate's final action, fearing a riot by the crowds. Remember, his military career is on hold. He washes his hand of the blood of Jesus and releases Barabbas that the crowds demand and directs Jesus to be crucified. 12 illegal moves. There's sufficient grounds in today's legal standards to release Jesus based upon all 12 illegal moves involved in the 5 trials of Jesus. Jesus is truly innocent, yet he willingly dies for our sins to break the power of sin, death, demonic forces, and start a new royal revolution of new creature in Christ and new creation, and completes that by joining heaven and earth, giving us a new heaven and new earth. Crucifixion, slide 46. We usually think of the stations of the cross, and that's a great way to get a sense of the journey towards crucifixion. But in a sadder, more painful, agonizing sense, Jesus has been walking, according to Isaiah 53, the stations of the cross all his life. Then the resurrection, empty tomb, the burial and the resurrection. 1 Corinthians 15, I want to bring this Easter message to a close. Remember, my focus next time I'm going to talk about the resurrection more in depth. Uh, but I wanted to take time to walk carefully with Jesus through all his 5 trials, get a sense of the heart and what Jesus went through. St. Paul says, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received." So what he's talking about, he received this, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time. 500 men. If you count the women, it's easily 1,000 people, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then all the apostles, and last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. For I am the least of the apostles until I'm fit to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace towards me was not in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God which is with me. Whether then it was I or they, so we preach, and so you believe. Scholars believe that 1 Corinthians 15, the first part, is actually from an early creedal statement. The early church and 90% of the early Christians were not literate, so they couldn't read or write. So passing on essential understandings about Jesus, they share stories, and they also memorize creedal statements. And we think 1 Corinthians 15, the first part, Paul is actually quoting a creedal statement that was memorized and passed. And we believe that 1 Corinthians 15, the first part, probably was formulated some 6 months to 1 year after the crucifixion and resurrection. 1 Corinthians 15, embedded in that chapter, is the most ancient early church writing we have. Paul's quoting this. This is considered even by agnostic New Testament scholars as a historically authentic and reliable. My final thoughts. To know him is to love him. How can you get to know Jesus unless you hear the stories of Jesus? And let those stories touch your heart. 5 trials. Man acquainted with sorrow, rejected, betrayed, yet he, in his great love, he moved to fulfill the Father's will, to show love for his creation, and to offer such a great salvation that he pays the price for. Next week, the resurrection.
Hey, David, one comment came up in the text I thought I might bring to you today, and that is, Tim was asking, do you think Herod Antipas knew when he's looking at Jesus, this is someone his father would have tried to murder? Do you think that connection was made?
Well, we don't have any New Testament verse making that connection, but I think it's a reasonable speculation that the son would know what the father did, especially what the father did with all the babies in Bethlehem, 2 years and younger, infants and toddlers that were destroyed. Yeah, so I think Herod the son would know. So I'm going to ask Phil to come and do the communion. And I would encourage you folks, if you have bread and wine or bread and grape juice at home to take the communion now or afterwards. Phil?
We'll take just a minute right now for folks to get the elements. If you want to get the bread and the cup, we'll just wait just a moment. I really loved this message from David. The thing that really struck me was the fact that in Isaiah there are like 25 examples or words that describe the suffering of Christ. And we talk about being Christ-like. I was laughing with David this morning as we were talking about that. Like, um, that's how Christ is described, as someone who suffers. And I think as those of us who follow him, we experience suffering in our lives and injustice and inequity, we can lean into the Father and say, we know exactly what this feels like. And so with that said, let's take the elements. The Apostle Paul said, "For I received from the Lord that which I delivered unto you. On the night the Lord was betrayed, he took the bread. And after giving thanks, he broke it and said, This is my body broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, he took the cup and he said, This cup is the new covenant, which is for you in my blood. As often as you drink this in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. And so today on Easter, we say his body broken for you, his body broken over the sorrow, the heartbreak, the pains, the betrayals, the anxiety, the anguish, the uncertainty. And we say his blood shed for you. In Jesus' name.
Phil, thank you for breaking the bread and people. Sure miss you guys, but I know you are in his hands. And I know that whatever's going on will strangely, wonderfully, and powerfully go to serve his purposes for us and for his creation. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Today is a good day for those of you who've never placed your faith and trust in Jesus Christ. Why don't you do that right now? And let me lead you in a prayer. Jesus, I open my heart to you and I'm moving towards you. I would like to know you, grow in you, and I take your hand that you have extended to me, and I say from my heart, yes to you. So the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance and give you his peace, his shalom. In Jesus' precious name, shalom. As a people in the midst of COVID-19 and all the pressures, tensions, anxieties, stresses of that, shalom, shalom, shalom. Nothing will separate you from the love of God, neither life nor death, nothing. For he says, Lo, I'm with you to the ends of the earth. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. Have a great Easter day. Enjoy God. enjoys creation, enjoy each other. Love you guys.